Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love by Is This Self-Care? Narrated by S.E.P. Chapter 19. The Nundu. Trying Times for Draco Malfoy. Draco was feeling good. He and 4 other Aurors had set up a broad anti-apparition ward half a kilometer away from the fort, with the old ruin at the center. The team had been briefed by the Mazoologist accompanying them on the dangers of the Nundu, its lethal venom with no known antidote, its aggression, its wicked agility. The Aurors were to deal with the naughty wizards and the Mazoologist with the beast. At Draco's signal, they began their stealthy assault on the fort. The Mazoologists were a well-trained bunch who kept well behind the disillusioned Aurors, per their instructions. 2 half-asleep watchmen were stunned, silenced, and immobilized with cuffs. Then the Aurors moved into the fort proper, after Draco had rid the door of wards, and Buckley had taken care of the rather complex magical locking mechanism. German-made, Buckley muttered by way of an apology for taking so long. Now they advanced down poorly lit corridors rife with ill-cast wards. Draco took care of the latter as Buckley raised his wand in a detection spell. He signaled 2 more guards ahead, which Gogin and young Humphreys crept onwards to take care of. They came across a guard room, which was a mess of decrepit furniture and new sleeping bags, old food, and heaps upon heaps of the ballistic syringes that had proven so critical to track Talfrin down. 2 Aurors stood sentinel as Draco and the others pulled in the Mazoologist to inspect the syringes and their contents. They concluded that it was a torphin hydrochloride, a muggle opioid. Very potent, said the most senior of the Mazoologists, a witch called Ridgewell. Muggles use it to take down rhinoceroses. A squirt of this will stop a human heart in half a minute. Blimey, they've got enough here for 24 rhinos, said her younger partner. Or 1 very large Nundu. They discovered a stash of small crossbows in a dark corner. After a brief conference, 2 of the Mazoologists equipped themselves with them. We've got our own sedatives, said Ridgewell, but we know these will work if ours don't. Wait here, said Draco as he opened the door to the next passage. We'll go ahead and clear the way. And what's that bloody smell? Is it? Ridgewell sniffed at the air, looking rather like an English setter about to point. There was a foul, pungent smell seeping into the room. That'll be the Nundu, said Ridgewell. Male, judging by the potency. If you spot it, don't make eye contact. Move slowly and come back to us. I'm not sure disillusionment works on magical felids. Draco, who was rather more interested in Talfrin than the Nundu, slipped into the corridor, flanked by Buckley and Humphreys, with Gogin bringing up the rear. Fernsby was left to protect the Mazoologist. As they advanced, their detection spells suggested 3 more nearby human presences in the fort, as well as whoever else might be behind the meters of rock ahead of them. And underneath them, something big, said Humphreys, holding her wand to her ear as she knelt to the floor. It's growling. I wonder if it's dinner time. Happy to let the Medjais deal with the bugger, said Buckley with a shudder. There was a cry of frustration up ahead. The Aurors crept up close enough to hear someone swear. I can't fucking disapparate, came a rough voice. You try. Idiot, came a drawl. There was a moment of silence, and then, I can't either. Fuck, came a third voice. Talfrin's. Anti-apparition ward. Sound the bloody alarm, you idiots. Accio broom. The disillusioned Aurors slipped into a kind of inner courtyard. Gogin got a stunner off on the drawly wizard just as he lifted his wand to raise the alarm. A broom whizzed by Draco in the dark. He hit it with an incendio, and it was smoldering stick by the time it reached Talfrin's waiting hand. They're here, said Talfrin, backing into a corner behind a half-collapsed pillar. Finite incantatem! Finite incantatem! Hominum revelio! He was casting the spells in the general direction of the passage the Aurors had emerged from, hoping to hit someone and break their disillusionment. His remaining acolyte joined him in behind the pillar and did the same, forcing the Aurors to take up defensive positions behind piles of rubble. Talfrin swept his wand into the air to set off an intruder alarm. From a room behind them came footsteps, and then, suddenly the courtyard was crawling with 24 wizards. Shit, hissed Humphreys. Things had just become interesting. I'll take the left with Gogin, muttered Draco to Humphreys and Buckley. You 2 stay here and distract. Mind you keep moving so they don't pin you. Now that they were heavily outnumbered, there would be no fighting nice, which was excellent because Draco preferred to fight dirty. Disillusioned and with liberal use of legilimency, Gogin was an excellent partner. The Irishman was a brawler at heart and loved an opportunity to get messy. Gogan's disillusioned shape bobbed behind him as Draco weaved to the ragged line of men that was forming around Talfrin. He went ahead, softening the ranks with stunners while Gogan cleaned up after. When he'd tired of garden variety stuns and Petrificus totalis, Draco added a little spice. Having identified the better fighters through observation or legitimacy, he cast a few of the more magically demanding turncoat jinxes. And briefly, those opponents fought for the oars, until their colleagues cursed some sense into them. Buckley and Humphreys pounded Talfrin's lines with explosive spells and kept their enemies' attention on the front of the courtyard. Aguamenti was being sprayed where things, or people, had caught fire and added a heavy steam to the atmosphere. This was ideal for Draco and Gogan, who were even more difficult to spot within. They continued their advance toward Talfrin. Gogan came behind Draco to stun any who were still twitching after his passing. He secured them with the satisfying click of the cuffs. Draco's legitimacy showed him one man's intent to collapse a pillar into the corner where Buckley and Humphreys had holed up. Fatigued by his repeated stunners, Draco switched it up. A flick of his wand took the wizard out at the knees. Then he blinded him. Then he severed his Achilles tendons. All non-lethal measures, of course. Draco played by the rules. Mostly. Gradually, their adversaries became aware of a growing stillness on their left flank as Draco and Gogan moved in, while Buckley and Humphreys hammered them with an unfriendly barrage of spells. An unlucky Finite Incantatum hit Gogan and revealed him. Gogan disillusioned himself again, immediately while Draco levitated the big man to a spot 15 meters away, just before a bombarda exploded where he had stood. "Cheers," came Gogan's throaty whisper. They continued their advance. Stun, curse, legilimens, dodge, finite, stun, turncoat jinx, impedimenta, dodge, blind, legilimens, stun. Their numbers reducing alarmingly. Talfrin's remaining men were now disillusioning themselves as well, screeching Protego and scattering across the courtyard. It was the Auror's turn to fire Finite Incantatum at will. The anti-apparition ward was a double-edged sword. Draco dearly wished that he could apparate to Talfrin's side and take him, but he was only 2/3 of the way there. At Draco's count, there were only 4 opponents left, plus Talfrin. Buckley was hit with a Finite emanating from somewhere near Draco. Suddenly, in the realm of the visible, he was forced to dodge behind piles of boulders before a friendly disillusionment from the east side of the courtyard removed him from sight again. Humphreys. Draco systematically plowed through the ground near him with the Petrificus totalis until he got the disillusioned wizard who had hit Buckley. 3 left. "Your man's going for the chain," gasped Gogan. Draco whirled to see Talfrin launching himself at a dangling chain connecting to an ancient pulley. The pulley was connected to a large grill laying across a hole in the ground. "Shit," said Draco. Both oars aimed desperate long-range stunners at Talfrin. By some miracle, Gogan hit the man's leg, and Draco his shoulder. But Talfrin had already wrapped his arm around the chain, and his stunned body pulled it down. There was a grating sound as the grill was slid out of place, and then a rumbling growl shook the very stones under their feet. The Nundu leapt out of its underground prison and was now loose in the courtyard. A fetid odor accompanied it, enough to make the weaker stomach man retch. The Aurors called out their retreat. They were not equipped to deal with this beast. Draco heard Gogan's breathless run at his side as they sprinted for the passage. The Nundu turned to them. As it transpired, disillusionment did not work on magical felids. Draco made a note to tell Ridgewell should he survive long enough to speak to her again. The beast was tracking their movement, as well as that of a handful of other invisible to them figures in the courtyard. As the Nundu's eyes slid over him, Draco felt, for the first time in his life, what it felt like to be prey. The yellow gaze had a paralyzing effect. The creature's movements were so easy and sinuous that they were hypnotic. Its scarred, magic-repelling hide, bristling with venomous spines, rippled as it walked. Draco's wand felt as useless as a twig in his hand. He and Gogan stilled and looked at the ground, as they had been taught by Ridgewell. It was one of the singular, most difficult things Draco had ever done. His every instinct was screaming at him to flee or fire a bombarda at the creature's face. He could hear Gogan swearing a constant stream of "fuck" under his breath. There was a scuffle at the passage that led to the exit. 2 of Talfrin's men were fighting to get past it before the other. The Nundu leapt, crossing the courtyard in 2 graceful bounds. The men's disillusionment dissipated as they died. One crushed by the creature's weight, the other casually decapitated by the sweep of a paw. His head rolled to Draco's feet like a gory quaffle. The passage was too small for the Nundu to enter. It turned its attention back to the courtyard. Its nostrils flared wide, venom dripping from its muzzle. It was sniffing for something. Another of Talfrin's disillusioned men made a run for it. He was summarily killed, cut in 2 bloody halves by a bite. That was, at Draco's best count, the last of Talfin's crew. Now there were only oars left standing. The Nundu turned its nose back to the wind. It found what it had been sniffing for, Talfrin's stunned body. Talfrin was snatched up, tossed into the air like a child's plaything. He hit the wall with a musical crunch. Then the creature eviscerated him with an easy swipe and began to eat. Slowly, amongst the wet sounds of Talfrin's innards being slurped up, Draco and Gogan moved towards the passage. Draco hoped that the disillusioned Buckley and Humphreys were doing the same. No sudden movement, no eye contact, just an uninteresting drift towards safety. The Nundu raised its head. It looked to the east of the courtyard. Humphreys. The creature ambled towards the eastern corner with a kind of lazy anticipation. Draco couldn't blame the young Aura for the explosion of spells she cast towards the beast. He would have done the same thing, but he had been cornered. She sent something cutting at its face. It shrugged it off with a sneeze that scattered venom in 2-meter radius. Draco raised his wand. Gogan, disillusioned arm by his side, did the same. "Confrigo, as hard as you can," said Draco. They slashed their wads downward with an identical timing, causing their spells to twin together and hurl like a firebolt towards the beast's flank. The spell exploded upon impact, leaving their ears ringing. Humphreys was hit by the percussive force of the blast. She hit a wall and lost her disillusion. Draco could see her crawling away through the smoke. And the Nundu? It had been knocked sideways by the explosion, but now it regained its feet and shook its mane, as though this had been a playful shove and not a deadly spell. It turned the considerable weight of its attention to Draco and Gogan. "Shite," said Gogan. They raised their wands. The beast leapt. Gogan hit it with a bombarda to its open mouth, which bought them a moment of respite as it landed, mere meters from them, and hacked out a cough wet with venom. Draco's blinding jinx was next, aimed at his eyes, almost at point-blank range. It did nothing but seal one eye shut and piss the thing off. Draco and Gogan scrambled backwards as the pneumatic whizzes filled the air. The Mazuologists had come. They peeked out of the passage and peppered the beast with ballistic syringes and their own tranquilizers. At this distance, half of the syringes were bouncing off the Nundu's hide. Buckley, limping badly, was dragging Humphreys toward the safety of the passage. Fernsby stood guard in front of the Magis and thickened the air with protagos before darting out to assist Buckley. Ridgewell conjured a herd of small leaping things which danced around the beast and distracted it for a moment until it vomited out its venom and they all dissolved. It bought enough time for Draco and Gogan to pull themselves behind a boulder. The Nundu's attention turned to Humphreys and Buckley. A dozen syringes were embedded in its shoulder and neck. 2, so far, minor effect. The Mazuologist levitated half a dead doe stuffed with tranquilizers toward the creature. It batted the doe aside, having learned in the course of its captivity not to trust any meat except what it had killed itself. The Mazuologist launched projectiles full of inhalant sedative which exploded in the beast's fate. This had been their last-ditch plan, as the inhalant would be just as dangerous to the oars as it would to the beast. Draco and Gogan cast bubblehead charms at each other and staggered further away. The Nundu stepped through the purple cloud with a hiss, finally showing some signs of slowing. One eye jinxed shut, blood running from its mouth, sedatives in its bloodstream and lungs. Its remaining eye was fixed on the stumbling Humphreys and Buckley, who were both now being dragged by Fernsby. Draco saw the sweep of a tail and the lowering of the hindquarters that signaled an imminent pounce. He slashed his wand toward the chain and pulley and whipped the chain around the Nundu's hind leg, just as it leapt. Gogan joined him, his wand crackling with effort as they pulled the chain backward through sheer force of magic. The Nundu was forced back, its claws digging deep gouges into the rocky ground. The injured trio of oars collapsed into the relative safety of the passage, leaving Draco and Gogan to face the beast. The Mazuologists were scrambling to distract the creature, conjuring a female Nundu, ignored, more meat, swatted aside, prey animals, ignored, a cage around it, smashed to bits, and finally launching enough immobilizing agents to sedate 12 rhinoceroses. Draco believed the tales now, of a single Nundu wiping out an entire village in eastern Africa. The Nundu had half collapsed. The sedatives were finally working. Its remaining eye was bleary, its mouth hanging open, Its legs grew boneless. It bared its fangs at Draco and Gogin, and a hot stream of venom jetted out at them. They dodged and were separated by a hissing black-purple flow. Draco was on the side of its remaining good eye. He aimed another blinding jinx just as the beast turned its heavy head to him and bared its fangs. He got the beast in the eye. The beast got him across the throat with searing venom. The pain of it shocked his system. His bubblehead charm vanished. He gasped out to breathe and took its lungful of sedative-filled air. Now the Nundu finally collapsed. So, too, did Draco. Draco awoke to a white ceiling streaking past him, as though he or the ceiling were moving at high velocity. There were raised voices, indistinct words, and sounds of general chaos. Running feet, clicking equipment, the whir of wheels. Then there was a crisp voice of command. The voice was reassuring somehow. It was the voice of competence and order. It was good. His body was no longer his body. It was a thing chiefly composed of pain. He could not scream. His ears caught the words of and communicated them to his numb brain. Envenomated, respiratory depression, paralysis of the diaphragm, lethal dose. And then, distantly, he could hear a scream. But it was not his. It was his mother's. "Get her out," said the voice of competence. "I'll speak to her when I've saved this one's life." Draco awoke to another white ceiling. This time it was not whizzing by impossibly fast. He took this development as good news. Other good news, he felt no pain. In fact, he felt excellent. He had never felt so wonderful in his life. Full of vitality, full of joy. "Full of painkillers," came a kindly voice. "You're stuffed to the gills with them." "Don't worry, child. Don't try to get up. I'll fetch your healer." The kindly voice belonged to a matronly set of witch in green St. Mungo's robes. A nurse. Draco watched her leave, giggling at the odd fish-eye effect occurring in his vision, which made her bum hilariously large. Then he blinked, and the walls began to squeeze inwards. If he closed his eyes, he saw kaleidoscopes. An orange cat and a Nundu whirling into each other, fighting one another in concentric spirals, on and on and on. He opened his eyes again. He was at St. Mungo's. He was alive. Shouldn't he be dead? "You should," came the cutting voice of order. "Am I saying everything I'm thinking?" asked Draco to the ceiling, with a deep philosophical curiosity. "Yes, and you will be for another few hours at least. You're on a little cocktail that affects neurotransmission. It was the only way to manage your pain during the procedure. You'll probably experience hallucinations, if you haven't already, of course." The SWAT was strong with this one. In a kind of slow motion, Draco turned his head to observe the healer. Her deep green robes swam into sight. Her mouth was set in a straight line, but her dark eyes were warmed by concern. She was beautiful. The light behind her glowed into a blinding halo. He thought he heard the sound of hymns. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Positively top hole," said Draco. "Are you an angel?" The angel healer did her utmost not to laugh, which was an angelic sort of thing to do, and only further proved her secret identity. "You can trust me," said Draco. He attempted to tap his nose, but poked himself in the eye instead. "I'll keep your secret." The angel healer did not respond. She was reading a chart. "I had an operation," asked Draco. "We'll talk about it later, when you've slept this off a bit." Something about her authoritativeness was terribly familiar. "I know who you are," gasped Draco. "Well, that's good. You're Hermione Granger." "Correct," she rose. Her robes danced about her in green swatches of color. "Your mother is frothing to be let in. She flew back from Italy as soon as we set word. But I wanted you to sleep first. I'd prefer you to have your mouth under control before you see her, all right?" "Fine," said Draco. "Excellent. Have a nap. We'll talk again when you wake up." Draco, with an effort, patted the bed. "Join me," said Draco. "No." "Why not?" asked Draco in a long sort of whine. "Because you don't know what you're saying," said Granger. There was restrained amusement in her voice. "I hope you don't remember this, for your sake." Draco, with a distant thrill of horror, heard himself say, "I want to kiss you." "No, you don't." "Come and sit in my lap." "Go to sleep, Malfoy." Granger was a distant figure now, melding in and out of the shadows in the corridor. She shut the door behind her. Draco closed his eyes. The Nundu and the cat continued their whirling battle, on and on until he fell asleep. Draco woke up again. Something about the sun streaming through the window told him that it was the next day. Unfortunately, he remembered every word of his conversation with Granger. Where was the Nundu? Could it come and finish the job of killing him? The kind nurse was back. She fussed a bit over Draco's sheets and applied a paste that smelled strongly of pine to his neck. Didn't he? Valia. It should help with the scarring. The nurse cast a few diagnostic spells on him and seemed satisfied by the results. You are doing remarkably well, Mr. Malfoy, all things considered. Your mother is here. Do you feel like seeing her? You needn't if you don't need to. Draco nodded. A few minutes later, his mother rushed in and embraced him in her thin arms. She looked frightfully shaken, pale, and tired. She perched next to the bed and fussed over him at length, inquiring about how he felt, how his neck felt, whether he could breathe, whether he could swallow, how he had slept, and so on and so forth, until Draco's mouth grew dry and he had to call for water. Draco learned that his team had made it out of the fort with a mix of injuries, though none as dire as his. This was his third day at St. Mungo's. The Nundu had survived and been transported back to the wilds of Tanzania. And the baddies? The beast had taken its blood-soaked revenge on Talfrin and company. Many were dead. Those that had survived the Courtyard massacre were awaiting trial. Narcissa squeezed Draco's hand. There were tears in her eyes. But enough about them. I am so happy to see you well. I very nearly lost you. I don't know what I would have done. Narcissa stopped and took a breath to force down a sob. She didn't like to cry. I'm going to be fine, Mother, said Draco. Narcissa straightened and dabbed at her eyes. Don't be cavalier about it. You almost weren't. You almost died. The Granger girl. Healer Granger. She was instrumental. Nobody knew what to do. That venom doesn't have a known antivenom. Most of the healers didn't even know what a Nundu was. Neither did I, mind you. What possessed you to go in pursuit of such a creature, I shall never understand. You were as good as dead, but she knew things, muggle things, I think. She whisked you away for 4 hours. I composed an entire eulogy in my head. And then she came back, and she said you were going to live. Draco squeezed his mother's hand. He attempted humor. Will you write the eulogy out for me? I should quite like to read it. Narcissa sniffed. She rose and strode to the window with her back to Draco. Her thin shoulders shook. Can't you take a desk job? She asked breathily. Quit this terrible Auror business. There was a knock on the door. Narcissa wiped away her tears. With her back ramrod straight and her usual severe expression back into place, she went to answer. It was Granger. She wasn't wearing her healer robes today. It was her professional muggle attire, another of those high-waisted skirts and silky blouses. Oh, I'm sorry for interrupting, said Granger. I can come back later. Draco couldn't really see what happened next. His mother lunged into the corridor with her arms wide spread, and all he heard was an oof from Granger as she was, presumably, hugged quite hard. There was the sound of weeping, some awkward words of comfort, and then his mother's heels click-clacked down the corridor. Her voice, thicker than usual, asked where the loo was. Your left, came Granger's voice. No, your other left. A door slammed, then silence. Granger poked her head into Draco's room. And how are we? A sight better than her, said Draco. She's had a rather distressing few days. She was convinced that you were going to die. So I gathered. One of my attendants had to stun her. You stunned my mother? Yes, she went quite mad when she saw you on the stretcher. She was a danger to herself and the hospital staff. I am terribly sorry that you had to witness that. Granger's expression grew rather wistful. It means she loves you very much. You're lucky to have that. Right. Granger was being a bit standoffish, hovering at the door. Aren't you coming in? Asked Draco. Oh, no, I'm not on duty today. I was just popping around to see how you were getting on. I've got to be at the Trinity in quarter hour. Teaching? Examining. A PhD, Viva. Are you going to be nice? In direct proportion to the strength of the candidate's thesis. Granger stepped back into the corridor and glanced down it. Should I send someone to check on your mother? No. Let her compose herself. She detests crying and she loathes public displays of affection. And she's just done both with you. Perhaps I should leave before she comes back, mused Granger. She won't have to relive the ignominy of the hug so soon. Draco agreed. However, there was one thing that he wanted to address, in private, before Granger left. His anesthesia-fueled idiocy. Might I borrow your wand? He asked. Whatever for? I, unfortunately, remember the things I said yesterday. Oh. I'd rather like to obliviate myself. No self-obliviations. You can use fire whiskey, just like everyone else. A bit cheeky sometimes was Granger. Right, said Draco. Then I'll be off to the pub as soon as bloody possible. When can I leave? Granger finally abandoned her post at the door to enter the room. She examined the documentation variously pinned or floating above Draco's bed. Then she cast a series of diagnostic spells which glowed in the obtruse green schema above his chest. Frankly, I could have you discharged tomorrow morning, said Granger, but no alcohol for at least a fortnight, I'm afraid. You've just survived a lethal toxin. Kindly allow your body to recover before you begin to imbibe another. Not even a butterbeer? No. But I have things I need to forget. So do I, Granger's mouth quirked. Bloody hell, said Draco, running his hand down his face. It happens all the time, said Granger. All the time. Yes. You get called an angel all the time? Truly. And invited for a nap? Yes. And sitting in laps? So frequently I've stopped taking notice. Fuck, said Draco, reliving the memory again. I'm going to go now, said Granger. There was a warble in her voice, the kind that indicated that she was on the verge of laughter. She left. Draco did not, repeat, did not, look at her bum as she walked away. For all he knew, some lingering trace of the cocktail would make him blurt out something stupid. All right, so he stole one glance when she was already well out of the room. Narcissa returned, nose powdered, eyes glamoured to be bright rather than red. A brilliant girl, she said of Granger, quite brilliant. But what in heaven's name was she wearing today? Draco did not inform her that he rather liked it. Narcissa had endured a great many shocks already. Finally convinced that her only son, her treasure, the apple of her eye, wasn't going to pop his clogs, Narcissa retired to the manor. Draco joined her there the next day and was near suffocated by the joint attentions of his mother and the worried house elves. For the next week, his every step, amongst a steady stream of friends and well-wishers, was haunted by either an elf or Narcissa bearing Valia ointment or restorative soups or warm compresses. He languished in the delicious self-indulgence under their care for the first few days, and then grew tired of it, and took to hiding in distant reaches of the manor grounds for the rest of his recovery. One morning, when Draco was feeling sociable enough to join his mother for breakfast in the dining room, he found her hard at work on a truly breathtaking floral arrangement. It was alive with movement, hummingbird hyacinths fluttering, the glitter of ruby poppies, and the dance of hollow vines. You've outdone yourself, mother, said Draco. Do you like it? Good. I hope she does too. She? Repeated Draco. Narcissa spared him a look over her shoulder, as though to check that he was, indeed, her son behind her, and not a stupid idiot who had snuck in unannounced. Yes, she. Healer Granger. Who else? She will positively adore it, I'm sure. It's to be delivered later today. One of the elves? I'd suggest Henrietta. She— Narcissa interrupted with severity. A house elf? Really? That which saved your life. You are going to take it to her, with as much effusive thanks as you can convey. She slid a thick envelope under a ribbon at the base of the arrangement. My words of thanks, I wrote. I doubt I'd be able to speak them without further hysterics. I've embarrassed myself quite enough on that front. Now Narcissa stepped away from the flowers, observing them with a critical eye. She called for Tupi to bring more ribbon. And your other task, Draco, will be to uncover whatever cause is near and dear to Healer Granger's heart, and ensure that our name and galleons are immediately lined up in support of that cause. I had been thinking the same, said Draco. Unless it's more of that chicanery about house elves. Right. Or muggle things. No muggle things. Well, perhaps yes to muggle things. They have got orphans, right? See to it that you find out. Of course. There was a lull in the conversation. Narcissa cleared her throat and, with casual insolence, said, Speaking of elves, they mentioned that you'd had a great many dinner guests in my absence. I'm glad that you were able to keep them occupied. Happy to, said Draco with an equal measure of insouciance. I don't know that word. They did very well. They mentioned, in passing, that Healer Granger had been by, said Narcissa. Draco felt that they had just arrived at the real crux of the conversation. She did come by, yes. Might I inquire about the subject of discussion? So his mother was going to be nosy about it. Not a surprise. I had to make amends. I made her burn a pie, said Draco. You made her burn a pie? Yes, we were quarreling about her otter. Her otter? Yes, she was partially in the right, mind you. I did concuss McLagan. You concussed McLagan? Amongst other things. He hadn't much in the way of brains anyway. Have we finished with the quizzing? I must confess I am left with more questions than answers, said Narcissa. Henriette also tells me that they replenished Healer Granger's larder. Oh, that, yes. I was rather dismayed to find out that the witch who was to save my life was subsisting on dried goods and tinned tuna, and it gave the elves something to do. Narcissa looked eminently confused, but said, Of course. Draco turned the ensuance up a notch. It was a dinner with a colleague, nothing more. A colleague. Ministry business, terribly dull, and top secret. Can't discuss it. I see, said Narcissa. I shan't pry farther. Thank you. That would be the best course of action to take. Narcissa's speculative look was interrupted by crack. Henriette popped into being and curtsied. Pardonnez-moi for the intrusion, madame, monsieur. Monsieur Draco, Madame Tonks is fluing for you. Draco left his mother to her confused dissatisfaction. Tonks's head was protruding from the fireplace in the flue parlor. She said something that might have been, watch her, but might have also been a sneeze. Do you want to come through? Asked Draco. No, I haven't the time. I just wanted to observe you with my beady eye. As she said this, her eye grew quite beady, and ensure that you did survive the Nundu venom. Rumors are true. Show me the injury. It must be dramatic. Draco tugged down at his collar, which was gooey with Vahelia ointment. Oh my! Are they saying it'll heal? Probably, said Draco, grimacing as he replaced the collar against his still raw neck. Better it doesn't. The scar would be quite dashing. How are the others? Oh, you know, a little worse for wear. A bit limpy, a bit bruisey. Gogan and Buckley are still coughing up inhalant. We'll have to devise better than the bubblehead charms next time. And Humphreys? She's developed a phobia of cats, poor thing. Now, Tonks's arm was sticking out of the fireplace. She took out a scroll. But look at this. You lot cuffed 20 naughty wizards, all told. Other than the dead ones, I mean. They must have been planning for a show that night. That's why there were so many of them there. Draco crouched to examine the list. Shit, we got Hawks? Kerr was there? I didn't recognize him. And Royston. Lovely harvest. One of our best in years. I'd offer you a pay raise, but, you know. Tonks gestured to Draco's grandiose surroundings. Seems a pretty paltry sort of bonus, considering. I thought I'd offer you something else as a reward. Oh? Asked Draco, curious about how one rewards the man who has everything. Absolute freedom on your next assignment. You choose from my box of surprises. Goody. And I'll be taking you off the Granger protection jobby, because that is the kind of tender-hearted, grateful cousin I am. I know you were never keen on this one. Draco felt himself grow unaccountably tense. What? Tonks, under the impression that she was making a grand and generous gesture, wiggled her eyebrows at him. I know. I was thinking of Humphreys. They'd get along, wouldn't they? Better than the two of you, anyway. Humphreys couldn't. Granger has a cat, said Draco. To his ears, the weakness of the excuse resonated embarrassingly through the flue parlor. Tonks scoffed. Humphrey would work around it. Don't be silly. Or perhaps I slipped the job to Gogan to keep his nose unbroken for a bit. The man gets into a punch-up with every mission. Now Tonks withdrew her head from the flames. Draco heard her screech. Someone kill the bloody thing! Her head popped back into view. Sorry, Weasley's having a crisis. There's a spider. The interval had given Draco time to work out an excuse. Not Gogan. For Granger, he said, keeping his voice disinterested and neutral. Not any of them, really. My family rings are a rather key component of the game. I think it'll be best for me to stay on this one. Tonks arched an eyebrow. Really? Are you sure? Yes, we found an equilibrium, said Draco. An equilibrium, repeated Tonks with unnecessary poshness. She was fixing him with a shrewd look behind the mockery. All right, the offer stands, should you change your mind. I'll see you next week. Before, no doubt. I'm being suffocated. Tonks tutted. Poor darling. Enjoy the remainder of your convalescence. My regards to Narcissa. Tonks's head disappeared from the fireplace with a pop. As the flames in the hearth resumed their normal color, Draco was left to ruminate on the unexpectedness of his reaction at the thought of losing the Granger assignment. His response had been almost physical, almost jealous. He dearly hoped that Tonks hadn't noticed. He also pondered the uncomfortable question of why he hadn't let the Granger job go. Some immediately obvious reasons sprung to mind. Well, not exactly reasons, memories, rather, of specific moments. A golden evening on the beach, the way she bit her lip when she didn't want to laugh, roses and their bewitching effect, the feel of her joyous kisses. But these were not reasons, and were therefore easily dismissed as pointless sentiment. After some grasping about for sounder arguments, which took altogether too long, Draco concluded that it was because he was an Auror with pride, who wanted the job to be done right, and who wanted to see the thing through to the end. There, that was better. It all made sense, and if a minuscule part of him enjoyed Granger's ludicrous holidays, or took delight in her company, or had rather begun to look forward to seeing her, or any such nonsense, it was just vastly overpowered by this robust rationale. His mother called him into the dining room to advise him that the flower arrangement was completed, and that he could deliver it to Granger at his earliest convenience. Draco sent a note to Granger inquiring about her availability that evening. She'd be at the pub with Potter and friends, but home by 9. Would that suit? Draco replied that it would. Home by 9, Granger was a wild one. That night, Draco retired to his chambers for a shower and a shave. As he dabbed a drop of cologne onto his wrists, he felt oddly like he was preparing for a date, which was idiotic, because all he was doing was being an errand boy for his mother, really. When he dressed, he made sure that his collar remained half open to show off the dashing injury, but only because it was so dashing, and not because he wanted to solicit any kind of fussing or attention from Granger, or anything like that.